So, good day, everyone. Welcome to the next webinar dedicated to political trust. Thank you very much for joining us today. Today, we talk about immigration policy. Our webinar focuses on how mainstream parties' increasingly tough positions on immigration shape citizens' political trust and ultimately patterns of far-right voting. And we are very pleased to have today with us Lucas Gies, presenting his paper on this topic. Lucas is a research fellow in the School of Environmental Sciences at the University of East Anglia and a member of the Tyndall Center for Climate Change Research. Lucas's research focuses on questions of political representation, in particular the relationship between citizens and politicians, as well as how political actors engage with climate and immigration issues. Prior to this, Lucas has been teaching and also has some research roles in comparative politics, including at the University of Bamberg. His published work includes comparative studies on descriptive representation, immigrant origin candidate voting, and the institutional constraints on substantive representation. Lucas, thank you so much for your time. The floor is yours.
Thanks. Thanks very much. Good afternoon, and thanks for having me. I much appreciate the opportunity. As Xenia said, my name is Lucas. I'm currently a research fellow at the University of East Anglia in the School of Environmental Sciences. And I thought, before delving into the nitty-gritty details of my study, I thought I provide a little bit of personal background to it. So basically, this paper published online last year in government opposition, and I think in print in spring this year, is essentially a legacy project of my PhD project at the University of Bamberg in Germany, where my PhD was on the institutional mechanisms of political representation in the immigration society. So essentially it was focused around the question of the responsiveness of political systems to growing immigrant origin electorates. Results of that were also published in different outlets in case you are interested. This government and opposition paper that I'm talking about today basically started from a side project, excuse me, because of my general research interest in political representation mechanisms, especially in the face of social, economic, and ecological challenges. So I'm interested, generally speaking, in the interconnections between publics and political elites in representative democracies. My work focuses on politicians, parties, voters, and also intermediary actors between these. I have a thematic focus on immigration, and since recently and increasingly more so on the socioeconomic transformations in the face of climate change, which has basically also brought me here to UEA, to the School of Environmental Sciences. So the research motivation for this paper was essentially that I became increasingly interested in the empirical observation that centrist parties across European countries basically became ever more restrictive on immigration and integration issues. I mean, in the UK, for example, only last month, the Labour government announced a new immigration policy plans, which would make the life of asylum seekers in the UK even grimmer than they already are. So it seems that this is sort of almost like a natural reflex to the public saliency of the issue and electoral threat from right-wing populist parties. I don't know if you're aware, but for example, in the UK, Reform UK is at present leading in the public opinion polls, suggesting that if we had elections very soon, they could win actually the Prime Minister's office. These kind of party or mainstream party responses is perhaps an attempt to kind of appease these heated public debates on the societal impact of growing immigrant populations, and of course also an attempt to keep at bay the electoral success of these far-right competitors. And Yeah, so I realized that basically, much of the research on this topic was on the electoral effects, basically, of mainstream party position taking. However, there was quite limited knowledge on the consequences of this type of party behavior on political norms and practices beyond voting behavior, and in particular political trust, which has led me basically to conduct this study. So I guess I don't need to sell this really with this crowd, but yeah. Basically, political distrust is, of course, an important concept. As it's important for the legitimacy of democracy. It's a relational concept through which individuals evaluate whether central political actors in the system perform legitimate functions in the system. As such, it is, of course, and ample research and literature has shown this a key heuristic through which individuals actually evaluate politics in terms of democratic legitimacy, in terms of the performance of governments, but also in terms of things like law compliance norms. And there's also a quite interesting literature on the linkage between political trust and immigration policy attitudes, which I have based this paper on quite a bit, which basically shows that immigration skepticism seems to be a driver of political distrust. And I think I really like this one quote from Laura McLaren, who said essentially immigration skeptical citizens tend to blame political elites and institutions in which they operate to have sold out the public by failing to protect the national community from the potentially disruptive and divisive force of immigration. Wherefore, they are building this kind of low level of political trust, or in other words, distrust. So my research questions are basically then based on that literature, or on these literatures that I've already described a little bit. What is the interlinkage actually between that? Does mainstream party position taking matter at all for citizens' political distrust? And by extension, if it matters for trust levels, then is there also an extended relevance for right-wing populist party voting? So basically, does the trust effect translate into changed patterns of voting behavior for these parties? So in terms of the theoretical framework, I developed this basically, based on expectation from the literature that I just mentioned, that immigration skepticism fuels political distrust. So basically saying that there is a political distrust imbalance with immigration welcoming citizens on the one hand having higher trust levels than immigration skeptics on the other hand. And then the question is there a moderation effect? How does the position taking of mainstream parties come in here to moderate this link? Theoretically, I'm basing this essentially on the spatial theory, assuming basically that citizens kind of develop behavioral options and political attitudes based on their evaluations of how their own policy positions on certain issues compare to those of parties and also of central parties in the system. And if that's the case, then tougher immigration positions should make immigration skeptics perhaps more trusting than immigration welcomers, and immigration welcomers at the same time less trusting. So the assumption is basically that citizens develop trust feelings out of outcome-based policy evaluations by comparing their own policy positions with those of parties. And the idea is here that mainstream parties are central to those evaluations because they are central and often, carrying governments in the system. So therefore, mainstream parties might be able to restore trust of immigration skeptics by going tougher on immigration, but also deteriorate the trust of immigration welcoming citizens, basically on the other end of the spectrum. Then, if that's the case, then I think there should be additional conditions that should apply. First of all, it might be then mainly the positions of center-right parties to have this effect because of their basically ideological playing field right of the center, wherefore they can more credibly commit to tougher immigration stances. And thirdly, it might also depend on their status as being actually in government as opposed as compared to being in opposition, because in government, of course, they have greater policy influence and actually be able to kind of translate their positions into actual policy outcomes. So I have basically these hypotheses. The first one is essentially that the link between citizens' immigration skepticism and political distrust should become weaker the more the restrictive immigration policy positions of mainstream parties are. The second one is essentially the same one, just with the condition added that it's mainly the positions of center-right parties. The third condition is that the participation in government is also important here. And then finally, sort of as an extended analysis hypothesis, that the same conditions basically matter for the relevance of political trust as a driver of far-right populist party support. In terms of, in terms of data, when looking into opportunities to conduct a study, I was faced with the situation that the main requirement is basically to link party position-taking data, so contextual level data, to individual level data across Western European countries. So my study focuses on Western European countries because mainly of similarities in kind of immigration experiences, which go back far further into the past compared to countries in Central Eastern Europe. And basically, what I figured was that the European Social Survey provides a very good data source for this because it's also linkable to a source for party contextual data, which is the Chapel Hill expert survey data. And these two data sources are basically quite straightforward to link. They are collected in the same years, in 2006, 2010, 2014, and 2018, which is what my study focuses on, of course. It's available for 14 countries, and that provided me with overall 49 survey waves containing in total 79K individual level observations. Then in terms of main individual level variables, I mean, of course, I was constrained by what is available in the European Social Survey data. So I'm using here their indicator or indicators on trust in politicians, parliaments, and parties, and build basically an average score based on that standard item in this data. As a main independent variable, I'm using information on individuals' immigration skepticism, which is basically based on 3 10-point scale, which tap into different aspects of immigration attitudes in terms of the economic impact, the cultural impact, but also in terms of the more broader idea of to what extent immigration makes a country a worse or better place to live in. At the party level, I'm looking at mainstream parties, which are identified by the Chapel Hill Expert Survey coding. So I use socialist parties as indicator for center-left parties, and the center-right parties were identified based on a definition provided by Haj Abdu et al., which basically say that center-right parties are conservative and Christian democratic parties, and some, though not all, liberal parties. I'm not going to go into which parties were identified as such, but they are all kind of that information is kind of provided in the paper very comprehensively in a table, I think. And basically for these parties, I leverage then informational data on their immigration policy positions. Similarly to the ESS data, the CHESS data also provides 10-point scales, which I averaged and also seat share weighted, because in certain countries, of course, you have more than one center right or center left party. For example, think of Belgium. So, but the idea was to get basically to an indicator at the country level, essentially. So one for center left and one for center right. And so one item tapped into the distinction between liberal and restrictive immigration policy, the question whether parties favor multiculturalism or assimilation of immigrants, and whether parties support or oppose more rights for ethnic minorities. And this is basically what this data looks like in my joint data sets. On the top, basically, you see immigration policy positions of center-right parties, as you would expect. They tend more to the right, center-right, and in the bottom plot, you see the same for center-left parties, essentially. In terms of statistical models, I'm using here multi-level ordinarily square models because, of course, because of the combination of contextual level and individual level data, and also the clustering, of course, of the survey data within countries. So this uses basically random intercepts at the country level, and I'm relying heavily here on cross level interaction effects. So when that's the case, I'm also specifying random coefficients for immigration positions at the individual level. So basically, these interaction effects work in a two-way manner. One, basically the interaction effect between parties' position taking on immigration and individuals' immigration position taking. And then I'm also adding another contextual level variable, which is the distinction between mainstream parties' status as government or opposition party. I control for a number of alternative variables at the individual level, but also at the contextual level. Yeah, and as this is published research, of course, there's also an extensive appendix providing robustness checks of the findings shown in the main article. Okay, let's go into findings. So this is basically an extract from the progression models, which is also shown in the main version of the article. So basically, firstly, across models, we see that this baseline expectation that immigration skepticism is driving political distrust is confirmed across models. Then looking here at the interaction effects of or with center left and center right parties' immigration positions, we basically see that the negative effect of citizens' immigration skepticism on political trust becomes smaller as center-right parties take more restrictive stances on the immigration issue. However, there's no such effect for center-left parties' position taking. So this seems to provide some support for hypothesis 2, that basically the mainstream party distinction between center-right and center-left parties is important here. Then we are Also looking at the three-way interaction to test hypothesis 3, which basically brings in the distinction between government and opposition parties. Here now focusing on center-right parties only. And I'm using here, rather than looking at the regression tables, I'm relying here on marginal effect estimations for better comprehension of these interactions. And we start here with the marginal effects of individual positions. So here we see basically the marginal effects of citizens' immigration preferences on trust on the y-axis, depending on center-right party position taking on the x-axis, and basically we see here on the left hand basically these effects for when center-right parties are in opposition, on the right hand when they are in government, and we basically see that this effect is much more strongly shaped by center-right parties in government. And as this is the case, to provide further nuance, I visualize this dynamic also as the marginal effect, this time not of the individual position, but of the party position. So basically the marginal effect of a tougher immigration position of center-right parties, depending on where an individual is located in the immigration space. So basically that's here on the x-axis. So the further you go there to the right indicates individuals who are more immigration skeptics. On the left-hand side, you see more individuals which are more immigration welcoming, and you basically see this is sort of the negative marginal effect. You basically see that this effect plays out mainly on the left end here. So basically showing that the movement of center-right parties on the immigration scale deteriorates political trust of immigration welcomers, but it has a much smaller effect on the trust levels of immigration skeptics. Then I also conducted sort of an extended analysis, which was, to be fair, something that I was pushed to do by a reviewer. But I think it also shows interesting patterns here. So basically the question is here, what's the consequence of this kind of trust reshaping effect, if you like, for far-right voting? So how does the political distrust dynamic triggered by center-right political parties' position taking translate into far-right? And so it's of course the same data. The difference is just that I'm now looking at the dependent variable based on the ESS information on a variable on party voted for in the last election. So I turned this into a bivariate variable, basically distinguishing between individuals having voted for such a party or not. These radical right-wing parties were identified again based on the chess categorization, and as well as what basically existing scholarship suggested. And again, I'm relying here on multi-level regression analysis, but this time is logit models, but the specification of clustering and random effects is similar to the OLS analysis that I just presented. So this is basically the results from this model or from these models as predicted probability plots, which basically show the likelihood of voting for a far-right populist party as a function of political trust. And what we see here basically in the right-hand plot, again, based on the context where a center-right party in government takes different types of immigration positions, so either more liberal or more restrictive, we basically see here that the negative impact of political distrust on far-right voting takes place in contexts in which center-right parties are in government and take more liberal immigration policy positions, but when they take more restrictive immigration policy positions, they this effect basically or this correlation you should say basically disappears. So basically, yeah, political distrust becomes less relevant as a driver of the far-right populist party vote when government or when center-right parties in government go tough on the immigration issue. So, and as I argue in the paper, basically that this is likely a consequence of this trust shaping effect, excuse me, of such position taking across the immigration policy spectrum, because essentially immigration welcomers, as we have just seen, become less trusting, whereas people at the immigration skeptical end basically maintain their level of distrust. So because of that, because basically people who are pro-immigration, if you like, they wouldn't vote for those parties, but nevertheless have lower levels of trust. This is basically translates into this pattern. In terms of conclusions, I mean, this was kind of the extended analysis, but I think the much more interesting part is actually the trust dynamics, and it basically shows that center-right political parties' decision to go tough on immigration can really have serious and unanticipated repercussions for public political trust. So basically, immigration skeptics' trust levels, they don't change really. So they just basically stay as distrusting as they were. However, on the other hand, immigration welcomers' trust deteriorates significantly. And so in total, because of that, we come to lower levels of public political trust. In terms of contributions to the literature, and that's the last point, basically, I think there were basically three contributions or three literatures that this can contribute to. First of all, it improves knowledge of when immigration skepticism actually translates into trust. So basically shown that these mainstream party position taking is an important contextual factor to consider. It also improves knowledge of when distrust translates into far-right populist party support, namely in the based again on these contextual factors. And I think it also improves knowledge of the consequences of mainstream party position taking on immigration, which so far has mainly looked at electoral effects. And I think I would like to keep it here. So yeah, thank you very much for joining me and for your attention.
Thank you very much, Lucas, for your presentation. We have now some time for questions and answers or any other comments, remarks our colleagues would like to share. So the floor is open. Please raise your hand and we can address our questions to Lucas. Yes, we have the first question from Darren, please.
Hello, Lucas. Great presentation. Thank you very much. Really, really interesting. This may be a little bit of an unfair question, but I've actually been just at a 3-hour session with some master's students on trust and populism and immigration featured as part of that because of the debates in the UK recently. And I was wondering about I guess the chicken and egg question, and whether trust in government, trust in things getting better, that belief that society is getting better is the underlying problem, or rather the belief that society is not going to get better and you don't trust the government. But then the immigration rhetoric, which appears in media, which appears from populist parties, is then used to almost sort of deflect some of this anger or direct that mistrust against government, against migrants, thinking of Donald Trump's comments about immigration in America. So whether this sort of plays into an existing level of mistrust and immigration is used as the vehicle to direct that to then benefit populists like Trump, reform, etc., which I know is outside the scope of your research, but just a question that we were battling with this morning, so I thought I'd share with you.
Thank you, Darren. Should I directly say something, or are we collecting
Please
more?
go ahead.
Yeah, no, thanks. That's a really good question, and yeah, as you already indicated, I guess difficult to answer with my based on my research. Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably like the interconnection between these attitudes and the rhetoric that's provided by some political elites is certainly more complicated than I was able to show. And I mean, obviously, my study is also a correlational analysis, so I can't really answer the chicken and egg question, and I'm not going to try to do that, to be honest. So yeah, I think what I was trying to do is basically provide a plausible theoretical framework based on the literature and trying to basically bunch that up, if you like, with with the data that I had available at this time. And to be honest, the study also developed over a couple of years. So I'm sorry, I don't think I can answer this if you. But I think I sympathize with that for sure. And I think yeah, there is more. And I mean, what I can hope is basically that what I've provided here is something that will maybe get people thinking in the same way and conduct follow-up studies.
Thank you very much, Lucas. I have the next question from Pippa.
Hi, Lucas. Thanks very much for the presentation. I'd like to ask you about a broader context. So you've focused in particular here on immigration policies and how the parties respond. So I'm interested in whether this is a general pattern. And obviously, there are issues of environment, which you've also been working on, and which I'd like to say whether or not, for example, if you're pro-environmental and against climate change, so that should have some relationship to your votes for environmental parties and how far major parties are responsive on green issues. And similarly, you can think about left-wing or progressive parties and responsiveness on jobs or unemployment or social welfare, etc. So is the core argument basically that it's about the responsiveness of the parties to public concern, and particularly the concern of particular voters, which creates the trust or mistrust? And so it should be extendable to all the other parties with their particular issues, depending on what those issues are. Is that the core argument?
Yeah, I think well, that's also a big and good question. I think, I mean, this study is, yeah, it's very much rooted in sort of immigration specific literature, if you like. But if you look at it, I guess from a broader perspective, I would think that can generalize. I mean, I suppose it depends, of course, on the salience of the issue. I mean, with the environmental agenda and the transformations that are ongoing and that also need to scale up a lot, that might become much more of an issue. I would be surprised, to be honest, to see that already, because immigration is just a much more divisive issue, I think, and I think that's sort of I think I would think a requirement for this to work. Yeah, I hope that can
So,
provide
so it's the salience of the issue which matters, not the nature of the issue, the salience, right?
I think so, yeah.
So
Yeah.
any salient issue, basically, if the parties they have their own issue ownership, if they don't respond, then you expect there to be an impact on trust. So in other words, it's a rational basis for how voters are responding to what the legislature does or what the party does when they're in power. That's the broad argument.
Well, basically, obviously, yeah, I think the behavior, basically, the position taking of parties on these salient issues, they matter, and people look towards that and develop, feelings of political trust, and you basically see, a rearrangement across the board, and I think what this paper basically showed was that it can lead to overall deteriorations of public political trust levels.
Right. So just to finish off. So in other words, you shouldn't trust the government. You shouldn't trust the parties if they don't respond on your salient issues. There's no problem about mistrust increasing, but it's not a problem with the public. It's a problem of basically non-responsiveness, non-representation. It's a reaction to that. A perfectly rational reaction. If they don't do what
I think that's right. I think that's right. Yeah.
Good. Okay. Thanks, Lucas.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Pippa. Yes, we have next question from Claudia. Please go ahead.
Thanks for sharing your findings. I'm not sure you can answer this, but these questions arose when you were speaking. Do you think that mainstream parties shifting to a tougher immigration stance reduces the appeal for people who are distrustful, or on the contrary, do you think the tougher immigration policies by mainstream parties could legitimize far-right rhetoric and increase polarization?
Yeah, thank you. I think this is also a question that certainly goes beyond this paper, but I think that kind of plays that role that you were just basically describing, right? That of course it can legitimize certain positions on the very far right. And I think there's also existing research that basically shows that quite convincingly. But yeah, I mean that was not kind of the focus of this paper.
So you go towards more supportive?
Towards more supportive of what? Sorry, could you maybe?
The question that if there's a tougher immigration policy by mainstream parties, does it legitimize far-right rhetoric or increase polarization? Do you agree more on that or not?
Oh yeah, no, I would agree. Sure, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Claudia. Any more questions to Lucas? Okay, then one question from me while everybody's thinking. Lucas, did you have a chance to compare in any way countries with a higher share of actual migrants coming and maybe lower share? Because European social surveys different European societies, and the share of migrants, the number of accepted migrants is very different. We know from other research on this topic that it's primarily subjective perceptions of citizens that drive this attitude, not so much the actual number of migrants in the country, but nevertheless, the statistics provide some benchmark or framework for restrictive policies, how justified are they, how salient are they, how often discussed, etc., etc. So did you in any way look into the actual statistics, and if it has any implications for this association between migration and trust?
Well, the short answer is, I guess, no. No, I didn't look into this. Yeah, so it doesn't play a role in the analysis at all. But it's certainly an interesting take, I guess, to extend this this study. And yeah, so I would encourage you to pursue that. Yeah, and I mean, I would probably think here more as something that you should control for. But yeah, I think that's.
Thank you very much. Any more questions or maybe comments? I also don't see any comments in chat. Well, thank you very much, Lucas. Very interesting presentation. Next step in research. Question from people, Lucas, do you have any plans for the next steps in this research?
This is a question for me, yeah? Is that right?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. Personally, I don't. I think I have. I think maybe, as I said in the beginning of my presentation, moved on a bit. So I don't have any immediate follow-up projects. But who knows? Maybe who knows what the future will bring? Maybe I will do that. I mean, and that was also kind of the idea of this paper, basically to open up this. So it's more. I think it's more a study that is supposed to shed light on a new research agenda and provide some plausible patterns and ideas. And I would really like to see this being taken forward. But yeah, as I said, so my current research agenda is more towards the green transition. So I'm thinking about bringing back in immigration with kind of environmental politics, but not specifically focusing on political trust at this point in time, at least. So I don't have specific ideas or plans myself, but maybe someone else has.
Thank you very much, Lucas, for a very interesting presentation. If you still have questions to Lucas, there is an email address on the screen, so please take a note, and I hope Lucas doesn't mind if you contact him directly with questions. If you'd like to watch the presentation one more time, the video will be available on our project's YouTube channel in a couple of days. Thank you very much for joining us today, and have a good day. Thank you, Lucas.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah. Thanks for the discussion. Thank you.